Well, let's go ahead and lean in here. So really, we've broken this down into three areas, and really enjoyed some of the preparation discussions we've had around these topics, and really thinking, okay, what is the essence of what we're trying to address? And really the fact that, as you mentioned, prospecting has changed. I think we're kind of headed in this direction, or we were headed in this direction anyway, in terms of more virtual and more hybrid and leveraging technology. But I think that got accelerated over the last couple of years and created some unique challenges. So we'll talk about what it looks like today, how to create a playbook that can address that, then how to train on that playbook and some of the best practices around collaborative learning and training implementation. And then specifically, it doesn't matter unless we can apply it. So how do we apply that in the real world? And what are some of the things we can do to support our sellers out there to actually execute on that playbook? So that's really where we're headed with today's discussion. But what we would like to do, just to get things kicked off, is to hear from the audience and just have our audience chime in, and love to hear about what some of the prospecting challenges your team is encountering this year. So, given maybe some of the changes, some buyers are back in the office, some aren't. As we found, we can't always get them on the office phone for sure. And they may not be where we can go knock on doors, certainly. So, be interesting to hear from the audience. What challenges has that created for your team? And then we'll talk about how some of our clients are addressing those. John, what are you seeing with some of your clients in terms of the challenges that are coming up?
Yeah, I think we've seen some of the same things for a little while now. I think, as you mentioned, it's hard to know where to reach people. People are working from home, so you can't necessarily send things to their office. Their personal phone numbers aren't listed. That can be hard. But also, just once you do connect with somebody, how do you build rapport, right? In a limited period of time. It's not the same as walking into somebody's office and shaking their hand and having some small talk when we're in a virtual or hybrid setting. Often the parameters we're working within are a lot more structured and rigid, and it's down to business, and there's less time to make an impression. So those are just a few of the things that we've been seeing for a little while.
Yeah, and Ilona mentioned, and please do chime into the chat if you like to share some of the challenges that your team's experiencing. But she mentions with brand new people and customers, they're green to the industry, so they need to be onboarded, right? So they need to go through everything they need to learn the product, the industry, the sales process, and they need to learn some unique strategies for connecting with buyers given this virtual and hybrid world. And I think one of the things we're seeing is the signal to noise ratio has really gone up, or maybe it's the noise to signal ratio, but there's just a lot more automated emails out there. There's a lot to sift through, and it's really hard to get the buyer's attention. And so I think we need to be even more relevant as we address this. Patty mentions went from in-person to virtual, and now it's blended. So yeah, we don't really know sometimes whether we're going to be having an in-person meeting or if it's virtual, or how we get the attention. And Brenda mentions it's much more email, coming up with the juicy subject lines to catch attention. I think that's really important, Brenda. We have to be able to at least have them look at it, and then we better have a catchy first and second line to capture their interest and hopefully get them to continue to read. And we'll talk about some strategies that you can deploy to maybe get past that, because even the subject lines sometimes aren't enough, right? Any other thoughts on this, John?
No, I love that last one. I mean, that's the life of a marketer, right? You got to find out how to break through the noise and get people's attention in a busy inbox, and get creative. We've seen a lot more outreach on LinkedIn and social media. When you can find somebody's address, we've seen people, sellers and marketers running more direct mail campaigns to try to get in front of people and stand out. Going back to what used to work a long time ago. But this is great. I think it echoes what we're seeing, and certainly what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So I love Susan's comment here about making it fun and effective when reps can feed off each other, and like a power hour, right, or a prospecting afternoon. And we're going to talk about that. How do we share best practices? How do we create that energy, doing things so that people see what's working and feed off the energy, as she mentions, during those sessions. So I think that can be incredibly effective, and we want to create an environment and plays that they can use in that kind of environment, right? So they're not trying to come up from scratch or feel like they're on their own island, right? Doing it all their own. And then Ilona mentions using video messaging, and we're going to get into that because I think that is such a critical strategy these days, but it needs to be done effectively as well.
All right.
So these are some of the things, we've heard. One, hybrid is here, and so I don't think there's any going back to 2019, right? Whatever that looked like. And in some ways, maybe that's better. We can reach more customers, we can deploy different strategies, but we need to realize that hybrid is going to be around, and we may not be able to meet in person, or certainly in the same way we used to. And I do think buyers are harder to reach. Just getting through to somebody's phone these days, or getting through the spam filters, or getting, through the hundreds of emails that people are getting. So I think they are harder to reach, and there's more competition for their attention. So because there are so many different channels, and we've got social, and we've got email, and we've got video, and we've got people calling, so we really, again, need to be relevant to stand out. And John, maybe you could talk to the last bullet, but I know you have done some research in this area with your company, and certainly in the industry, that buyers want to be in control, and they have access to more information, and they're kind of in the driver's seat. What else would you add to that?
Oh, I mean, I think that's the crux of it, right? And we've been seeing this trend not just over the past 2 years, but over the past 10 years, right? And longer. Buyers want control over the buying process. It used to be that sellers were in the driver's seat. They controlled the narrative. They controlled the information, right? That was shared with their prospects. But prospects and buyers, I mean, they can do all their research ahead of time. They might not even need to talk to a seller to make a buying decision, right? So sellers don't have a choice now but to accommodate that. And I think certainly since we've gone into this remote hybrid world, buyers have shown a preference for virtual selling, right? They don't want to meet in person anymore. I think it's like 82 or 85% of buyers prefer a virtual sale as opposed to in person. So sellers have to meet buyers where they are. They have to be prepared to educate them as much as possible, and maintain some semblance of control over the process, while realizing that the buyer has more tools at their disposal than ever to make a buying decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, using those tools effectively, Susan brought up in the chat as well, we have tools that help with cadencing and, sending outbound, but how do we personalize those? And I think that's what's really critical, is we have to be hyper relevant. And, that idea of hyper personalization, how do we take the generic message, but then figure out those few things to get the attention? And I think it becomes much more, I'd rather, hunt with a rifle, a sniper rifle, than with a shotgun. So if you have that blanket message, maybe you're making 80 calls, but if you only get a couple of connects and you don't have much to say, you're not going to be effective. If we can narrow that down, and maybe we have a couple of those areas that we personalize in those scripts that makes it relevant to that individual, we take the extra couple minutes to do that, we're going to have a much higher response rate. We'll get into that and how we share those practices as well as we go along. So John, maybe you could walk us through, what the modern buyer's journey looks like these days, and how that plays into the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is broad strokes, right? But this is how we think about the buyer's journey as SalesHood. And I think it's pretty accurate. First, people are educating themselves. And this is very likely before they have engaged with a salesperson, right? They're on your website, they're attending webinars like this one, they're downloading white papers, they're reading your blog, they're reading your emails that you're sending. So this is very marketing driven section of the buyer's journey, but you need to know about it, and sales needs to be involved, right? How do we help control the message that people are seeing? How do we make sure that their journey is continuing, right? That each of these different bullets isn't cutting them off, that it's propelling them further into the funnel. That has to be a joint sales and marketing initiative. Right, they get into the exploration phase. They've done their education. They've made some educated decisions as to which vendors they want to work with. That's when a seller really comes into play, right? That's when you do your pitch. That's when you hold your meetings, your demos. When you present case studies, provide some references, perhaps answer FAQs or provide a list of FAQ answers to the buyer. But this is more the discovery phase, right, of the modern buyer's journey. And then they whittle it down even further. They're evaluating, they're going through trials. Sellers have to know how to handle the objections that are going to come up. This is when they're really comparing vendors head to head. So how do you push back against any objections your buyer might have? You have to come up with mutual plans, right? What are we going to hold what are sellers going to hold the buyer accountable to, and what are buyers holding the seller accountable to? Really making the business case, building proposals, going through the nitty gritty of the deal in the evaluation phase, and then at the end of the day, what the experience of your brand is important too, and that's not just handling objections, but that's showing, hey, if you become a customer, this is what a success plan looks like, right? This is how we're going to train your reps. This is what good looks like. This is how we're going to build you into our community, invite you into our community, and make you feel like a valued member of that community. Customer events are important for when you bring people on, and you want to make them feel valued and make them feel like they've made the right decision. And then then you get to the expansion phase or to an exit. Listen, there's so much on this slide, and there's so many different points that we can go through and different types of content that you need to be aware of. But you want to think about every single phase of the buyer's journey, especially in a hybrid world, of how do I provide the best value at the right time, right? Make sure you're not sharing too much too soon, or make sure you're not waiting to share until the very end. You have to really think about the journey in these phases and make sure that the content is bite-sized, make sure it's digestible, make sure it's engaging, right? People don't have a lot of time. They don't have a lot of patience anymore. I don't know if buyers ever had patience, but they definitely don't now. So you got to think about not just the types of content, but how you're delivering that content. And we're going to talk more about that as we go on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's really important about understanding the buyer's journey is often we get so caught up in our sales process, right? We're going to do our discovery, and then we're going to do our demo, and then we're going to put a proposal together or proof of concept. But thinking about where the customer is in their journey and aligning appropriately. And then for this discussion, providing the resources to the sales team that they need at the appropriate point and to be able to support that customer. So we're not trying to force, oh, no, we're at this stage, so we're doing these things, but really supporting the customer in their exploration or in their evaluation, or understanding the experience that it's going to be to work with you.
That's right.
And I think having that idea of a hub or portal where they can go and reference the appropriate materials is super valuable, and we'll get to that. So one of the things we want to I guess just put out there is getting a playbook that incorporates the ideas we're going to be talking about and really answers the question, what do the reps need to know to engage with the buyers? Again, this is specific to prospecting, but we'll talk about, then that obviously pulls through to the rest of the sales cycle. But we really want to kind of think of the who, what, where is it going to be, and how do we want them to engage? So let's think about that first, the who. And this is the fundamentals, the basics, but understanding ICP, right? Ideal client profile, understanding who they're going after, what the pain of that ICP likely looks like, and then doing our research so we can bring insights to that individual. So I think oftentimes we put out these campaigns and we're just going wide and broad, but we're not really narrowing it into, well, what does the ideal client for us look like? And how do we get inside their head, understand their persona, and really tailor the messaging appropriately to that individual and to that company? So, I think any playbook really needs to look at who we're targeting first, and then what are we doing to engage? So what are the triggers that may be going on? Are they growing? Are they expanding? Are they acquiring? Maybe they missed their numbers, and we can, that triggers some type of strategy we could put in place. Maybe they're expanding geographically, and so we can share a story about a client where we help with that type of an expansion. So we really want to be looking at what the triggers are, what's going on in the account, and what strategies we can employ that might get their attention because we want to pique their interest. And then how are we actually going to do that? So this is where we get into the tools, the content, the scripts that we might have, and what are the specific plays. So if we hear this, we're going to run a certain play. We have an offering, we have a white paper, we have a demo or a discussion. So what are we actually going to do based on that? And then finally, I'd love to get your comments on this. Where do you access that information? So where can the rep go to find the resources, the references, and to be able to replicate so that after they're trained, they're not running around going, well, wait a minute, what was that supposed to look like? But they have some home and some resource hub that they can reference. So the who, the what, the how, and where you're going to go. If we can lay that out and make it pretty clear, I think it actually informs our training and it informs our implementation. What else would you add to this, John?
Yeah, I mean, these are the big categories, right? And I think if you look at these just on the slide, it's like, yeah, I mean, this all makes sense. Who wouldn't do this? But I think the problem is too much of the time, there's not enough thought given to each of these components, or it's a little bit haphazard, or you dump too much training on all your reps at one time and you do nothing to reinforce it, right? Like you're saying, and then reps, they don't retain the knowledge. You could talk all day about the forgetting curve and how quickly people forget what they learned, right? But we won't, don't worry. And people don't think about access. This last point is so important. Reps need to know not just the who, the what, and the how, but when they need it in the flow of their work, right? So right before they go on a pitch, right before they send a prospecting email, they need to know where to find the information that they need to be successful. Remember, we have that content that maps to every stage of the buyer journey. They need to know where to find that content, right? And how to personalize it and who it's for, right? So if they don't have that, they're going to be scrambling to find it, or they're not going to use it, period, right? They're going to just say, hey, I'm going to wing it. I'm going to create my own content, or I'm not going to care about any of the tools or scripts or plays that you gave me because I don't know where they are. And when sellers go off script, sometimes that's a dangerous game, right? So we want to maintain control, and we want sellers to feel like they are fully supported with this playbook.
No, and it's critical, and we'll show a little bit about what that looks like in SalesHood. But I think one of the important takeaways is there can't be a disconnect between training and then kind of the field enablement, right, or the support. And I think oftentimes that happens. We go through this training or onboarding program, and it's like, okay, now go do it. And sometimes there isn't even a connection to what the training was, or it looks different when you actually get out in the real world, right? You get out in the trenches versus leveraging those resources as part of the training and saying, okay, well, here's what you need at this point in time, and it's accessible. And I think it's actually an exciting area within sales enablement of providing that just-in-time support for the reps so that they know where to go and they can leverage that, and we can incorporate it into the training. So John, maybe you could talk about what those components look like in SalesHood as an example, and how we can support the reps in that case.
Yeah. And I apologize to Ray as we were going through this for the gigantic SalesHood logo in the middle and not trying to be overly promotional, right? But it's interesting because when you think about enablement, often you're just thinking about one of these four categories in the wheel in the middle, right? You're thinking about learning, or you're thinking about coaching, or you're thinking about guided selling, or you're thinking about content sharing and content management. You've got to bring them all together in order to provide a comprehensive experience for your sellers and to create and support your playbook. Of course, you need to be thinking about learning. How are you deploying learning to your reps? How are you ensuring that they're actually certified in what they need to know? How are they practicing their pitches? Just your traditional learning paths. But then you need to add coaching to that. You need to be able to review what the rep learned, review their pitch, provide feedback on their pitch. And if your learning platform is connected to your coaching platform, that makes that job a lot easier. The same thing when we start talking about content. Okay, your rep has learned, they've been coached, they're going out to the field. And like we just said, maybe they don't know where to find anything, so they don't share that. They don't use the content that's been made available to them. Make sure that your sales enablement platform or strategy, at the very least, is connected to your learning and your coaching platform. So So you can have content that's stored in that platform that is, for instance, mapped to a deal stage, right? So every prospect who's a stage 1 opportunity, for instance, you can see who that is, and you can see what content maps to that stage in the sales cycle, and the seller can know what content they should be sending to try to get in front of that prospect, or try to drive that prospect forward in the cycle. And then once they share that content, we move into the content sharing and content management side of the wheel here. That's when you start understanding, okay, I know what content to share. Here's how I'm going to share it. And I want to save a little bit. I'm going to keep you in suspense a little bit, because we're going to talk about how do you actually share content effectively a little bit later in the presentation. But think about, how am I sharing this content with a prospect, and what's the impact that it's having on the deal? You're not just throwing PDFs out into the wind and hoping that they're read, but you need to understand, is this actually being leveraged? Is it being used? Is it being appreciated in the sales cycle? You need all of these different components to support everything we were talking about on the previous slide. And you need to be thinking about them in an integrated way, not in silos. So that's a shift. I think that's a shift that's really taken place over the past year, even in sales enablement, about bringing all these categories together. And again, it's one of those things where you look at this slide and it makes total sense, but it's not how we've been doing it. And so we need to adjust our thinking a little bit.
Yeah, no, and I think we could really put the rep in the middle, right? It's like, we really want to focus on them and their needs. And that is the whole concept, from initially learning, getting the support, if we have some AI tools or some guided selling, some things that are helping instruct them at the point of the need, and then having the content available to share with each other. There was a question that came up from John, and he asked about, salespeople are hyper, so they're moving quickly, maybe they're not stopping to really analyze, right? And he says, how do you get them to look at the data, or maybe lean into some of these areas that we're talking about? And I think the point is, we have to make it very relevant to the rep and very functional. And I think that is part of the problem with some of the tools that are trying to overly either automate or provide a bunch of analytics, is it's just overwhelming. They don't know what to do with it.
That's right.
And so the point, maybe you could talk a little bit more about the guided selling, but I think we need to make it specific to them at their point of need, and say, oh, here's a suggestion that you can use, but not expect them to go dig into the data or have every rep be their own, sales enablement analyst. It's just not going to happen, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I don't think it's that reps don't want data. I think it's that they don't want to go look for the data, right? They don't want to go try to interpret the data themselves necessarily. So if you're going to incorporate data into your selling process, or you're going to try to surface, recommended next steps, you have to bake it in to their selling process, right? In the flow of work. Something I've said, countless times over the past couple of years since I've been in this space. If you deliver information to reps in the flow of their natural day, right? So that you're not taking them out of their rhythm, you're not taking them out of the field, so to speak, but you're delivering it to them in a single platform in a way that makes sense to them, they will use that information. They want to improve. I've yet to meet a sales rep who doesn't want to improve, right? They are motivated by performance, unless they're lazy, in which case, cut them loose, right? Like it's, there are high performers and low performers, but generally speaking, reps want to improve and they want to win. So you just need to deliver the information to them in a way that matches the way that they sell. And that's part of what this wheel is trying to signify, right? It's all contained within the same workflow. And therefore, it is easier for the reps to digest and to implement at any given time. So it's about removing friction from the process, and it's about showing the value to the reps. A lot of what we talk about at SalesHood is replicating what good looks like, right? So being able to share a video during your training process of a seller, one of your top performers, delivering a pitch really well, right? And allowing their peers to comment on that video. And we're going to talk more about peer learning, I know, but just being able to show that example of what good looks like gives other reps a target to strive for, right? And motivates them to perform. So, I think just simple things like that get reps more engaged in the process and more willing to follow the process if it's given to them in a really clean way.
Oh, that's great. So with that as a backdrop, so we've talked about kind of the components, how to put a playbook together, and then let's get into the idea of, training, that the actual rollout and support, once we've identified what those components look like, because, I think it's important that we're paying attention to the individual learner. And, to the extent that we can't have necessarily a one-to-one personalized plan, but we can at least understand what does that role need? What is the typical path that they need to go through? And then roll the training out again, not as an event, but as a spaced learning over time, so that they're able to get it, apply it, collaborate, and continue to support it. And it's an ongoing, or should be an ongoing experience. So we'll talk about reinforcement and coaching throughout as well. I guess, what else would you add to this, John, in terms of, how you actually support the training rollout?
Yeah, I mean, again, Bullets covered it nicely. You covered it nicely. I definitely gravitate towards the persona-based learning paths. I think too often training is rolled out as a one-size-fits-all for everybody, right? Everybody in the organization. But the reality is, SDRs need different training than account executives, and account executives for mid-market need different training than enterprise AEs, right? And CS reps or account managers need slightly different training than everybody else. So again, you don't have to create individualized learning paths, but create persona-based learning paths. And I think you'll find that the impact is a lot greater, because people realize that this learning is tailored to them. And couldn't agree more with the need for reinforcement. We don't need to belabor the point, but like, if you're not reinforcing the training, you're not actually training, in my opinion. So make sure that you're doing everything you can on an ongoing basis to support what was learned, reinforce skills, coach as much as you can. I know managers struggle sometimes to find the time to coach. Use the tools that are available to you as a manager to provide as much coaching as possible, because otherwise your reps are going to feel unsupported. They're not going to perform as well. And eventually that's going to lead to churn. Right. So I found that everywhere I've been. If your reps aren't coached and aren't mentored on a regular basis, performance eventually sags. Right. And this idea of peer-to-peer learning I think of peer-to-peer learning in two ways. One, I think it's actually you're taking some of the weight off of the trainer's shoulders, right? Off of the manager's shoulders. I think so often we think of training as this top-down initiative, must be controlled by sales leadership, must be controlled by sales enablement, and nobody else has a say in it. I think when you democratize training and enablement, we actually say, hey, we want everybody in sales. We want every seller, every SDR to collaborate with one another, to watch each other's pitches and provide feedback. All of a sudden, it's not all on the trainer to train, right? Reps can point out things that they like or don't like, strengths and weaknesses. They can share ideas. They're the ones who are in the field, right? They're the ones who tend to know what works and what doesn't. So that feedback is really important. So that's one component of peer-to-peer learning. And the other is that salespeople trust each other, right? They trust each other. They're in the field together. They're the ones on the front lines of any organization. They're getting beaten up every single day, rejected every single day, and having success most days, right? So they trust each other, and they trust what each other has to say, and they'll learn from each other really well. So that can actually make them more engaged in the learning process if you allow them to participate.
Well, I think that's spot on, and seeing it come to life where they're like, oh, that's how they did it. That's how I just had that problem, versus a canned scenario or case study that was written 10 years ago, and they're trying to figure out how it's relevant. I think it really works into an overall strategy. And I mean, this is the way we think of this idea of what we've coined as the CLX, the collaborative learning experience, which is, still the core components of blended learning. But when you can take that, so say micro learning, 3 to 5 minute short videos, we're discussing a key concept or topic, we can add that customized content. So we've incorporated something we call voice of the seller videos. So we'll go out and interview top sellers about specific content. So in addition to the formal micro learning, they're getting these little bite-sized nuggets of talking about how to apply a skill. And then we ask them to go out and apply it. So whether it's a mission or kind of an assignment, okay, go build your prospecting script or create a prospecting video and share it with your peers. And now they can see that, and they can actually comment and socialize and start to discuss that. And so in the collaboration aspect, both in live sessions, so we do live intermittent, what we call ARC, application reinforcement and coaching. Say, okay, you've applied it, let's get together and talk about how that went. Let's hear from each other about how it went, and let's go out and practice some more. And then they have the tools and the resources, available, whether that's through a sales hub or within a training platform that they can refer back to. And then ultimately, there's some progress along the way. So we love the idea of when they're getting points and kind of progress towards a completion. Now we know what completion looks like. And with salespeople, I can tell you from a lot of experience, the competition kicks in and they want to be there and they want to look at their leaderboard and they want to see how they're progressing. And so however you're doing that, it creates a more focus versus even, and as a facilitator, for years and years in the classroom, you often don't know who's really leaning in and not. You may only have 15 minutes for an exercise, a few people speak up, and then you're on to the next topic. Well, guess what? Here you have the evidence. Did they complete it? Did they contribute and participate with each other? And who's actually getting a lot of likes and comments? And is there an example you want to share because it's really a best practice? So now that creates that social learning aspect. And I think that's really critical.
Totally agree. Yeah, I love this. It takes into account all of the fundamentals of what not just good training for a hybrid prospecting looks like, but good training in just period looks like. It's not about the big data dump. It's not about one size fits all or just in case learning. It's about bite-sized content, testing the learning, collaborating around the learning, and making sure that people have access to the tools and can see and celebrate success. Right, that means so much to all of us, I think, but particularly to sellers. They want to be recognized, right? They want to be rewarded for success, and being able to see progress and visualize prospect and say, this is who's really strong, this is who needs work, and hey, here's a badge for doing a good job. Like that means something. So this is great.
Right. Well, I think it really is the focus on what do they need to know, what do they have to do, and how do they apply that? And this is just some of the feedback we've gotten, but thinking about we had the chance to learn from each other. We talked about what worked and what didn't work, and get feedback from each other and apply it. Right. So it was based on the activities we would have to do with customers. We would apply it and come back. And we love the stories, and we're hearing them every day about, hey, I applied this and it actually helped me close this deal during the training, right? And that's what you really want, is not, let's see 6 months from now if it made a difference, but if the program's spread out over 6 or 8 weeks, they're going through intermittently, they're applying it and coming back and saying, yeah, I actually got a meeting and now I have an opportunity and now I'm advancing that. So again, applying it in the flow of work, I think is really important. And, we talked about some of the motivation around it. We like to use Credly as a way of providing an actual badge then or completion to say, well, you completed these missions, you participated in the exercises, and at the end of the day, you received this badge, and they can share that on their LinkedIn, et cetera. And that's really helped with this. Was from a initial group we ran through, over 80% completion rate for digital learning, which is exceptional for people who also have day jobs, right, and are going through other activities. So providing some way of knowing that they've done the work and they've applied it in real life.
Yeah, and that's important, especially in this hybrid, virtual, digitally driven world. Sellers want to put this type of badge on their profiles, right? So they can prospects can see it. This is a credible person. Their peers can see it. That this is something that they've accomplished. It's I don't know. When I first heard about badging way back when, I was like, this is kind of silly. I don't really care about a made up badge, but people care. They really do. We do so much badging at SalesHood. We've got a ton of options within the platform, and it gets used every single day, and people eat it up. It really does make a difference. So it's cool. It's very cool.
Yeah. So, let's talk a little bit more about the practical application. You talked about customizing and tailoring it to personas, and what that might look like for a real application. I want to bring this back to, we kicked this off saying prospecting is harder, it's challenging. We know there are different techniques we can use. Video is one of them. So maybe you could walk us through what that looks like, in the real life here, about applying a skill, like maybe creating a video practice or
Yeah.
engaging that way.
Yeah, really just a quick visualization of what we just talked about could look like. Specifically the learning paths, in SalesHood, we have what we call huddles. But you can see this is a learning course, right? You can populate it with a lot of different things. If you look at the diagram on the screenshot on the left, you can see different module types that you can put into your path. But you can start things off with a training video and then do a knowledge check based on that video, and have the team complete an exercise, and have them record a pitch, and so on and so forth. And you can personalize these huddles. You can personalize learning paths based on the people who are going through them. So you can have a path, like I said, for SDRs, for AEs, for customer success, for account management. And each one can have a slightly different track that you're going through, but you want something that's really easy to create. I think that's part of why we don't customize learning a lot, is because it's hard to do it. It's hard to customize it. So, we've worked really hard, at SalesHood to make sure that managers can very easily create different paths for different people based on different scenarios, and that it's as templated as possible, right? So it's just about making this easier, right? Making it a little bit more frictionless as you create these paths, and it can be really powerful. And on the right side, we look at video practice and peer feedback. What could that look like? Again, I'm using SalesHood as an example because I think it's a really good one, right? You can have a rep record themselves doing a pitch, doing some pitch practice, and then their managers and their peers can come in and they can provide feedback and provide scoring on different components of the pitch, and those scores can be tallied into an aggregate, like you're seeing in the shot. And is that scary? Yeah, it's a little bit scary, to have people have so many people have access to your pitch. And within our system, you can control who sees it, so it's not a free for all if you don't want it to be. But it just exemplifies the fact that training is more powerful if it is shared, right? If it's a shared experience and people are going through it together and they can see their peers' work and they can reflect on each other's work. And we want to give teams the power to do that in a really clean, easy, and engaging way. So again, you don't have to do it exactly this way, but I think it's always good to understand what this type of implementation could look like.
Absolutely. And yeah, being able to track that, and you have access, and we'll talk a little bit about the manager's role in coaching, but the fact that the manager can come in and then check in and see how their team's doing and see some of the examples and provide feedback without, maybe they're not able to go out and ride along like they used to, or they can't listen in as many calls as they'd like, but they can see how they're doing even in an onboarding scenario, getting engaged early on to see how they're coming up to speed. And then, we'll talk about how we actually apply that after they've been trained. But let me make sure we're back here. Yeah. So we've kind of identified what's important and created the playbook. We've talked about how we train and some of the things we can do to create that collaborative and peer-to-peer learning environment. And now we want to apply it in the real world, right? And keep the training alive. And I think that's the really critical piece, is it obviously can't stop, with the training efforts. And so we want to bring it into the field and see how it's being applied. So delivering the process to continue to build relationships and trust. And, we'll talk more about video, but video and asynchronous, what are we doing to engage differently given this challenging prospecting world, and having access to the content and being able to share that. And we'll talk more about outcomes and measurements. But I just wanted to share a few thoughts on the idea of video and prospecting, because it's certainly gotten a lot of attention. I think people are trying it. Maybe they're getting frustrated. I think we need to, again, to be really relevant and purposeful about how we're using video. And I mean, we provide a Selling to Key Executives program where we talk about using video. And one of the challenges is there's research that suggests using video for the very first outreach doesn't actually have an incredibly high success rate with a key executive. They don't know who you are. They get a lot of those are like, oh, this is kind of hokey. If you've warmed them up, maybe through a social channel, you've engaged on LinkedIn, maybe they've gotten a couple of emails, they know who you are, they're much more likely to say, oh, I'll listen to John, or I'll watch John's video. And some of the research is so compelling then about if they use video and they're using that in their outbound, they are going to get a much higher response rate. So sometimes up to 3 times as high, and even using it in the proposal process. Proposify did this study and said there was 45%, 41% higher close rates if you're using video, not in the initial meeting necessarily, but to amplify a proposal and saying, John, I just wanted to recap the high points of this proposal. And now that's very tailored and personalized to you. And so this goes beyond prospecting, obviously, but it's just how valuable that can be, and having platforms that can support the use of that. And, the asynchronous video, as Forrester points out, is going to be a critical part. It's going to become table stakes. It's one of those key skills. And we really need to start to get our arms around how to use that more effectively. What else would you add to this, John?
Yeah, I mean, let's just keep talking about video for a second, because it is so critical, because we're now in this, kind of mashup of a hybrid, professional community. So we're in so many different situations. The opportunity to get FaceTime with a prospect is so limited and often not available at all. And emails are great. Emails are tried and true. They're not going anywhere. LinkedIn Connect, same deal. Yeah. But the more you can strategically use recorded video in your outreach, the better off you're going to be, because that is an opportunity to put a face to a name, to put a face to an idea. I know that, listen, I'm in marketing. I have vendors reaching out to me every single day. And the ones that get my attention are the ones, that personalize their outreach and make it clear they actually research my business. That's always a good start. Yep. But the second is, like, if they do throw in a video that just goes a little bit deeper and shows that they made that video just for me, right? And that they've done their homework, they know who I am, they know somewhat who they're talking to. That's powerful. And seeing that person, seeing them speak, seeing them show emotion, it takes some of the robotic nature of virtual and hybrid selling out of the equation, and it starts to break me down as a buyer, right? Make me more receptive to speaking to somebody, because I don't mind speaking to people. I just don't have a lot of time, right? So that's why the asynchronous nature of recorded video is so critical, because none of us have time, right? We're all busy. Decision makers in particular are very busy. They don't necessarily have time for even a 15-minute meeting, but they might have time at the end of the day as they're closing out their emails, or maybe even after dinner as they're prepping for the next day. They might take the time to watch a 30-second video and say, instead of deleting it, they might actually follow up on it. But you have to give them the flexibility, to give them the control, right? Going back to the very beginning of this presentation, give them the control over their experience while injecting your own personality into that experience. That's the real power of asynchronous video. And as far as I know, we're going to talk about tracking content sharing and correlating activity to outcomes. So, we can go into that on the next slides, but, sellers and trainers and enablement professionals should not just be thinking about how to deploy learning in the field, but how do you track the effectiveness of it? Was the training right? Was the content that you created effective? Very often we're not tracking that, or we're only tracking it at an anecdotal level, or a lot later, once deals have either closed or not. We can say, oh, well, I guess maybe that case study or that deck wasn't very good. Let's go back and try to revamp it without any data behind it. But there are tools now that can help us track that. And we can also track, did learning activity correlate to business outcomes? Was seller engagement in learning programming effective in terms of revenue outcomes? So, this obviously comes after prospecting, right? But nothing actually comes after prospecting, because we're always prospecting. We should always be trying to improve. So we can be using data from deals that have already been won or lost to influence the next round of prospecting that we go through.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons I love prospecting as a training and focus area is it is fairly easy to measure the initial results. Like, are we booking more meetings with the right ICP clients or not? And, that's a function of activity and skill. So do we have the right skills, and are we making an effort? And if we pull both of those levers, we should get more meetings. And if not, then we have something going on. But, you mentioned something about the sharing the videos. It also allows us then to track. And, we'll talk a little bit more about how SalesHood approaches that. There's certainly a number of other just pure outbound video tools that you can leverage. but most of them give you the opportunity to track the engagement and who's clicked on it and have they forwarded it, and what's going on then once it's inside the firewall, so to speak, and that can be really enlightening. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how we bring in some of those other digital assets and this idea of a digital sales room, how that pulls it together.
Yeah, I bet that there are a bunch of folks on the call who have started hearing more about digital sales rooms. It's a fairly hot topic. At SalesHood, we call them buyer sites, but it's exactly the same concept. But as part of the digital buying experience, I think one point of friction has always been the organization of content, right? And the sharing of content. Up until now, we've primarily just been doing that via email, right? Being just long email threads where you're searching for an attachment. I know that I've got email conversations with the vendors where I have to search through multiple email threads, look for the little paper clip, see if it's the right attachment that I'm looking for to find a deck or a case study or a proposal. It works, but there's friction there. It can be frustrating. So what we've started to do, and part of what we offer at SalesHood too, is this digital sales room experience where a seller can create a centralized and personalized buying experience for their prospects. So you can utilize this at a lot of different stages in the sales cycle. But if I'm prospecting, I can create a digital sales room for a prospect, and I can record a video of myself saying, "Hi, here's who I am. I'm sharing some content with you today. I'm sharing a recorded webinar that we have on this topic that I think you'd be really interested in, or I'm sharing a customer case study that I think is really applicable to your situation. And I'd love to chat about how we can apply these scenarios to your own situation and discuss what you need to be successful. And you can keep this room going throughout the entire sales process. So as you're submitting proposals, as you're submitting new decks, as you're bringing new people into the sales cycle, you can keep all the content, all the relevant content in one spot that the buyer and the seller can go back to time and time again. The nice thing about this is that for the buyer, it makes them feel in control of the process, right? They have all the information they need in one place. And as a seller, I have control over what goes into this experience. And I can also see how often people are interacting with it. So I can get a sense of which accounts are engaged and which ones might need a nudge as well. So I love this. I love this idea in general, because I think it's a helpful idea for everybody involved. And I think it takes the virtual selling experience to the next level, where you are crafting micro personalized experiences for buyers, which correlates nicely to what we've been talking about in terms of creating more personalized micro learning experiences for sellers. We're helping everybody get the information that they need in a much more intuitive and engaging way.
Right. Yeah. How often do we get the email, 6 weeks later, say, "Hey, can you send that proposal to me again?" Or what did we talk about, in that other presentation? And again, here you have that in a nicely organized way, and you can see what the engagement is. And, as we know, an engaged buyer is more likely to buy. So if they're going back there, if they're sharing, if they're multiple people hitting that site, we know that our chances of closing actually go up. So we want to provide that information to keep them, coming back and keep them engaged there.
That's right. That's right.
Well, let's talk about, some of the data behind this. We want to say, okay, it doesn't really matter if it doesn't produce results, but how do we look at this in terms of what the data is doing and, what the outcomes look like?
Yeah, and these next two slides are pretty quick, so I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, so I'll be fast. But it's just good to think about, again, the impact that your content is having on a deal and that your learning activities are having on a deal. So this is a simple chart. Again, comes from our platform. You can think about it however you want. This just shows like how many times a file was shared, right, and accessed, and how does that correlate to the revenue that was generated from the deals that piece of content was associated with, right? It's a way it's an intuitive way to look at content data that we didn't really have available to us before, or we were just sort of reacting based on our guts. This shows us that some content that's shared a lot results in higher revenue. Some content that's shared a lot doesn't quite work, and then there are the pieces in between. We can make decisions based off of this. You can say, okay, we need more content like this highest performing one, or you know what, we can scrap these ones in the lower left hand corner that they're not being used and they're not generating revenue, right? So it's another way to make decisions. And on this slide, same deal. It's showing similar things. It's just showing, this is showing your average learning path completion percentage. So this is actually showing each dot is a sales rep, and it's showing, did they complete all of their learning path, or did they complete 35% of their learning path? And then, oh, how much revenue, how much pipeline did they generate during any period of time? So you can see in the upper right-hand corner, that's your high performer, completed 98% of training and generated one of the highest amounts of revenue. And then your low performer is in that lower left, right? So again, it's correlating actions to real revenue outcomes, which at the end of the day helps everybody make better decisions.
Right. No, it's great to be able to see the analytics then that you can pull out once you're able to track that kind of information. So I know we've covered a lot of ground. We're coming up on the top of the hour here, but what we wanted to do is at least just lay the framework that prospecting is different. And, there are lots of tools and technology and different things we can do, but we need reps to think about engaging differently. And the strategies that we've discussed are really having that playbook that really answers well, who are we going after? And how are we going to engage with them? And what are we going to actually say? Where do I go for that information, right? So have we packaged that in a way that then we can train? And we talked about training collaboratively, sharing the experiences, having, tools that they can actually see what good looks like and learn from each other. And then supporting that through a place where they can go and get the information they need to support their client in their buyer journey, as you talked about at the different stages, and being able to reinforce and support. So what else would you add to this, John, just to wrap us up here?
No, I mean, I think we covered a lot of ground. I always, pretty much every webinar we cover a ton of territory. People are always like, well, I can't possibly tackle this all today. You don't have to, right? We're just trying to influence how you're thinking about prospecting and about the entire sales cycle in general. But I think everybody is aware that selling and prospecting has fundamentally changed. There's not a one size fits all solution to it. We just need to think about, how do we give buyers the control that they need throughout their virtual buying process, but still have sellers maintain strong engagement and strong control themselves throughout the process. How do we enable sellers to learn better to accommodate this more complex landscape? That's what we're really getting to when you sort of whittle through everything that we've said. We're just trying to help sellers succeed, and there's no question that the buying and selling landscape has become more complex over the past 2 years. So we're here to help. And Ray, what a pleasure presenting with you as always.